At 3:17 in the morning, two Israeli precision missiles destroyed a private home in northern Tehran. No military base, no weapons depot, no command bunker, a house. And in that house, sleeping, was the one man Iran had chosen to negotiate peace with the United States. His name is Kamal Karazi. His wife did not survive. This happened on April 1st, 2026, and before you process the date, understand what was happening in the days before it. Donald Trump had been telling the American public, repeatedly and with confidence, that the war was nearly over, that Iran was ready to talk, that a deal was close. He gave a timeline, 2 to 3 weeks. His words, not mine, 2 to 3 weeks. On the morning of April 2nd, Karazi was in a hospital bed with a fractured pelvis, internal injuries, and lacerations across his body. His wife was dead. And the diplomatic channel he had been personally building, a channel that involved the Pakistani foreign minister, a planned meeting with J.D. Vance, a neutral venue, a date in mid-April, was gone. Not delayed. Gone. Now here is the tension that sits at the center of everything that follows. Donald Trump is either lying or he is not in control. Those are the only two options. Because if he knew this strike was coming, if the United States approved or even quietly accepted Israel's decision to bomb the home of Iran's lead peace negotiator, then everything he said about a ceasefire being close was theater. Deliberate theater designed to manage American public opinion while his ally dismantled the negotiation from the inside. And if he didn't know, if Benjamin Netanyahu ordered this strike without telling Washington, then the President of the United States has no meaningful influence over the most dangerous military escalation on Earth right now. Pick whichever answer makes you more comfortable. Neither one is good. Let's be precise about what Karazi was. He is not a fringe figure. He served 8 years as Iran's foreign minister, from 1997 to 2005, under President Khatami. The reformist leader who represented the closest Iran and the West had come to genuine engagement in decades. During those years, Karazi built relationships with European and American counterparts that most Iranian officials never had access to. He was trusted, not liked, trusted. There is a difference in diplomacy, and it matters enormously. After leaving the foreign ministry, he became head of Iran's Strategic Council on Foreign Relations, an advisory body that sits above the day-to-day government and reports directly to the supreme leader. That position gave him something rare: credibility with both factions inside Iran. The hardliners who distrust any deal with America trusted Karazi because he had spent 20 years protecting Iran's interests without illusions. The pragmatists and moderates trusted him because he believed diplomacy could work. He was the bridge, not a perfect bridge, but the only one that existed. That is who Israel killed his wife to reach. The word targeted is doing a lot of work in most coverage of this strike, and it deserves scrutiny. Israeli military sources have not claimed Karazi was a military target. They have not said his home contained weapons or intelligence infrastructure. They have said nothing, officially, about why this specific address at this specific hour. Precision weapons were used. That is confirmed. F-35s fired 2 missiles into a residential neighborhood in the Shemiran district of northern Tehran, an area known not for military installations, but for the homes of senior Iranian officials and their families. The precision of the weapons is not in dispute. The precision of the intention is what you need to think about, because this was not collateral damage. Collateral damage is what happens when a military target is struck and civilians nearby are killed. Karazi's home was not near a target. It was the target. His wife was not collateral. She was present. And now Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, has spoken. Not in the language of grief, not in the language of negotiation, in the language of total war. The question this opens, the question that will drive everything in the weeks ahead, is whether the strike was designed to kill a deal or whether it was designed to kill the man. Because depending on the answer, the strategic logic of what comes next changes completely. Who was Kamal Karazi? What had he actually built in the weeks before the missiles hit? And why was he, specifically, the one person Iran trusted to speak to America? That is where we go next. 1997 was a different Iran. Not a peaceful Iran, not a democratic Iran, but an Iran that believed, for a brief and fragile moment, that the world might be willing to deal with it differently. Mohammad Khatami had just won the presidency in a landslide that shocked the establishment. He spoke about dialogue between civilizations. He gave interviews to CNN. He wore his clerical robes and quoted Alexis de Tocqueville. And standing behind him, running Iranian foreign policy for the next 8 years, was Kamal Karazi. What Karazi built during those years was not friendship with the West. Friendship was never on offer. What he built was something more durable and more useful, a reputation for meaning what he said. European foreign ministers who negotiated with him during the early 2000s on everything from Afghanistan to Iran's nuclear program came away with a consistent impression. He did not bluff. He did not promise what he could not deliver. And when he said Iran's position on something was fixed, it was fixed. When he said there was room to move, there was room to move. That sounds like a minimum standard for diplomacy. In the context of Iran-West relations over the past 30 years, it was extraordinary. He left the foreign ministry in 2005 when Mahmoud Ahmadinejad came to power, and the window Khatami had opened slammed shut. But Karazi did not disappear. He became chairman of the Strategic Council on Foreign Relations, a body with no Western equivalent, which makes it consistently misunderstood in coverage of Iranian politics. It is not a think tank. It is not a ceremonial post. It is a council that advises the supreme leader directly on matters of strategic foreign policy, operating outside the elected government, but with real influence over the decisions that government can and cannot make. Karazi's position there meant he could move in spaces that no foreign minister, no president, no elected official could, because he was not accountable to a domestic constituency that needed to be managed. He could talk to people his government could not officially acknowledge talking to. This is the infrastructure that made the April negotiation possible. Here is what was actually being built in the weeks before the strike. Pakistani Foreign Minister Ishaq Dar had been traveling quietly between Tehran and Washington since late February, not making headlines, not issuing statements, moving. Pakistan had offered itself as a neutral facilitator for the same reason it always does in South and West Asian diplomacy. It has relationships with parties that will not talk to each other directly, and it has enough of its own leverage to keep both sides at the table. Dar met with Karazi in Tehran on March 19th. He met with American officials in Washington the following week. By the end of March, the outline of a meeting had taken shape. Iranian representatives and United States Vice President J.D. Vance on Pakistani soil in the second week of April. Karazi was not going to attend as a tourist. He was the architect. He had spent weeks working through the internal Iranian politics of getting hardline factions to accept that a meeting with an American vice president was not a surrender. That work, the quiet, exhausting, thankless work of managing Tehran's internal fractures, is invisible from the outside. It left no public record. But it was the reason the meeting was possible. Without him having convinced the right people inside Iran that this was acceptable, Vance would have shown up to an empty room. The meeting was scheduled. The venue was agreed. The Iranians had a delegation in mind, and then, at 3:17 in the morning on April 1st, 2 missiles ended it. What is important to understand, and this is the part that gets lost in the coverage of battlefield strikes and political statements, is that there is no replacement for what Karazi represented. This is not a bureaucratic problem that can be solved by appointing someone new to the same title. The trust he had built on both sides of the negotiation was personal and took decades. Iranian hardliners who would accept Karazi as a negotiator would not automatically accept whoever comes next. American and Western officials who had dealt with him and understood how he operated would now be starting from zero with an unknown quantity in the middle of a war under time pressure. Diplomatic capital of that kind is not transferable. It dies with the person who built it, or in this case, it lies in a hospital room in Tehran with a fractured pelvis next to the grief of a man whose wife was killed in her bed. The track was not paused. It was not damaged. It was dismantled, precisely, deliberately, and at the exact moment it was closest to producing something. Which forces the hardest question of all. Who knew it was that close, and who decided that was the reason to act now? 2 missiles, 2 points of impact. The first took out the eastern wing of the building, the bedroom. The second hit the structural center, collapsing the remaining walls inward. The home did not burn. It folded. By the time Iranian emergency services reached the Shemiran district at roughly 3:40 in the morning, there was no structure left to enter, only rubble and the people buried inside it. Karazi was pulled out alive. His wife was not. His injuries, a fractured pelvis, internal bleeding, deep lacerations across his back and left shoulder, are consistent with being thrown by a pressure wave and buried under partial collapse. He was conscious when rescuers reached him, which means he was aware of what surrounded him. That detail matters not because it adds drama, but because it tells you something about the psychological state of the man who was Iran's only credible negotiating channel as of April 1st. Whatever he was before that night, whatever political will he had to pursue a deal, it now lives inside a person who pulled himself out of the ruins of his home and could not pull his wife out with him. State that, then move on. Because the consequences extend far beyond one man's grief. Inside Iran, the political geography of the negotiation had already been treacherous. Karazi had spent weeks convincing hardline factions, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the senior clerics who view any direct engagement with Washington as ideological contamination, that the April meeting with Vance was not a concession. His argument, as reconstructed from sources close to the council, was precise. Iran negotiates from strength, not weakness, and a meeting is not a surrender if Iran controls the terms. He had the credibility to make that argument because he had spent 30 years never making a promise he did not keep. The hardliners did not love the idea, but they accepted Karazi's judgment. That consensus is now dead. Not weakened, dead. The argument that Iran can negotiate with the United States while Israel bombs Iranian officials in their beds is an argument no one inside Tehran can make and survive politically. The Revolutionary Guard does not need to say a word. The strike said it for them. Every Iranian official who was persuaded by Karazi's logic now has to answer the same question. Persuaded to do what, exactly? To send a delegation to Pakistan so that Israel could demonstrate in real time what it thinks of Iranian diplomats who talk to Americans? The internal Iranian political cost of continuing the negotiation track after April 1st is, for all practical purposes, infinite. Now consider why Israel struck when it did. 3 explanations exist, and they are not mutually exclusive. The first is strategic distrust. Netanyahu's government has never accepted the premise that a diplomatic agreement with Iran can be sufficient, meaning any deal that leaves Iran's nuclear infrastructure intact, any deal that does not result in a fundamental change of regime or capability, is not a deal worth making. From that position, a promising negotiation is not good news. It is a threat. Because a promising negotiation produces political pressure on Israel to accept its outcome, and an outcome Netanyahu considers insufficient becomes harder to reject once American and international momentum is behind it. The second is distrust of Trump specifically. This sounds counterintuitive given the relationship between the two governments, but it is well documented in Israeli strategic thinking. Trump makes deals. That is his self-image and his political instinct. He wants to announce an agreement. He wanted to announce one with North Korea, with the Taliban, with China. The fear in Jerusalem is not that Trump is hostile to Israel. It is that Trump, under sufficient political pressure and with an election cycle always on the horizon, might accept a deal with Iran that looks good in a press conference and leaves Israel exposed. Netanyahu does not trust anyone else to define what an acceptable Iranian concession looks like. The third is domestic. Netanyahu is fighting for his political survival. A war that ends in negotiation is a war that ends in ambiguity, and ambiguity does not save governments facing corruption trials and coalition collapse. A war that continues, that escalates, that produces dramatic strikes and clear enemies is a war that keeps a government in place. All three of these logics pointed toward the same action on the same night. And then Khamenei spoke. Not through a spokesman, not through state television, directly, in language that removed all ambiguity. The language he used was not the language of a government considering its options. It was the language of a government that has decided it has no options left worth considering except one. Which brings you to the final question, and it is the one that should frighten you most. If Israel knew what was being built and struck anyway, and if Iran's response is now total escalation rather than return to the table, where exactly does Trump fit into this? And what does his silence since April 1st actually mean? 36 hours. That is how long Donald Trump went without a public statement after Israeli missiles destroyed the home of Iran's chief peace negotiator, killed his wife, and ended the only serious diplomatic track toward ending a war Trump had publicly promised to stop within 2 to 3 weeks. 36 hours of silence from the man who said the deal was close, from the man who said Iran was ready, from the man whose vice president was scheduled to sit across a table from Iranian representatives in Islamabad sometime in the second week of April. When Trump finally spoke, he said Israel has the right to defend itself. That sentence is doing enormous work, and almost none of it is honest. Kamal Karazi is a diplomat. His home had no military infrastructure. The strike occurred at 3:17 in the morning in a residential district of Tehran. Calling this self-defense requires a definition of the word that eliminates the word's meaning entirely. But more important than the content of Trump's statement is the timing of it, because 36 hours of silence from a sitting American president during an active military escalation is not an accident. It is a choice. And choices at that level have only two explanations. Either Trump approved the strike in advance, or he did not know it was coming. Walk through both. If he approved it, if Washington gave Israel a green light or a nod or simply declined to say no when asked, then every public statement Trump made about peace being close was a performance. The 2 to 3 week timeline was not optimism. It was management. Managing American public opinion, managing international pressure, buying time and cover while his ally dismantled the negotiation that Trump was publicly claiming to champion. That is not incompetence. That is a specific kind of deception, directed at the American people and at Iran simultaneously. If he did not know, if Netanyahu ordered this strike without informing Washington, and Trump found out the way the rest of the world did, through the news, then the President of the United States has no functional control over the military actions of a government he funds, arms, and shields from international accountability. That is not a diplomatic failure. That is a structural collapse of American credibility in the most literal sense possible. You cannot broker a peace you cannot enforce. You cannot make promises your ally can void with 2 missiles and 30 seconds. Neither explanation leaves Trump with credibility. Neither leaves the United States with leverage, and neither changes what is now happening on the ground. Here is what the coverage is missing. Karazi's wife was not the first family member of a senior Iranian official to be killed in this war. She was not the second or the third. Since March 1st, strikes attributed to Israel have killed the daughter of a Revolutionary Guard general in Isfahan, the brother of a senior foreign ministry official in Tabriz, and the elderly parents of a nuclear negotiator in a residential suburb of Qom. 4 strikes, 4 families, 0 military targets. This is not a pattern that emerges from accidents. This is a strategy, and the strategy has a name, even if no one in official Washington is willing to say it: collective punishment, directed not at combatants, but at the families of decision-makers, designed to make the personal cost of holding a senior position in the Iranian government unbearable. It violates the Geneva Conventions. It violates the foundational principles of international humanitarian law that the United States spent decades claiming to champion. And it is happening with American weapons, under American diplomatic cover, while an American president says Israel has the right to defend itself. The international community's response has been statements. The United Nations issued a statement. The European Union issued a statement. 3 Security Council members called for restraint. Restraint. As though what is happening in Tehran is a situation that requires cooler heads rather than a situation that requires someone with actual power to say no and mean it. No one with actual power has said no and meant it. This is where the logic of the war has arrived. And logic is the right word, because what is unfolding is not chaos. It is not miscalculation. It is a coherent strategic vision being executed with precision, and the vision is not negotiation, not ceasefire, not a deal that Trump can announce and Netanyahu can tolerate. The vision is the elimination of Iran as a functioning regional power, its nuclear capability, its military infrastructure, its diplomatic class, its will to resist. Annihilation is not too strong a word when the targets include sleeping diplomats and their wives. What comes next will be worse. Not because the situation might escalate. It has already escalated, steadily, deliberately, past every threshold that was supposed to trigger a response and didn't. It will be worse because the mechanisms that existed to stop it are gone. The diplomatic channel is gone. The negotiator is in a hospital bed. His wife is dead. Trump is silent. And the logic driving the war forward has not been interrupted, challenged, or slowed by a single thing that has happened since April 1st. The war is not nearly over. It has not yet reached what those prosecuting it would call its necessary conclusion. And no one in a position to stop it is trying to.